The restoration of the tabernacle of David is a biblical concept found in the Old and New Testament. It refers to the prophetic vision of rebuilding the unique worship structure established by King David in ancient Israel and the establishment of Yahweh's government on the earth. We will highlight the significance of the tabernacle as a symbol of Yahweh's presence, worship, and unity among His people. We will emphasize the restoration through Jesus Christ, who opens access to God for all believers, transcending cultural and national boundaries. As the tabernacle of David is restored, it signifies a time of revival and spiritual renewal where worship becomes a central aspect of believers' lives, drawing all nations to glorify and encounter the living God. It also signifies the government structure of Yahweh and how it should operate on the earth as it is in heaven. I'm Dr. Ray, and welcome to this week's Hosea International Speaks. Last week, we left off our session with King David's reign, which began Yahweh's kingdom here on earth. And we see that in Isaiah chapter 16, verse 5, which says, "And in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging, seeking, and hastening righteousness." And our confession should be the same as what Jesus spoke to His disciples when He was asked, how should one pray? His answer was to pray, "Thy kingdom come, on earth thy will be done as it is in heaven." And Isaiah 9:6 says this, "And the kingdom was and is the government that is resting upon the shoulders of the Son." Then we ended with, "And the increase of His government," we can find that in 9:7, "and the increase of His government and peace," listen to this, "there will be no end." That means when it's beginning, there should be no end. We said that this is Yahweh's prophetic word to us and for us, and that He is going to give us the power to pray the kingdom down. He is going to give us the power to bring the King's domain into every domain, so that the mountain of Yahweh will consume every mountain. When we say consume, we're not saying that the domains or the mountains will be done away with or gobbled up, but that they will then come under the jurisdiction of the mountain of Yahweh, under the management of the kingdom. How are we to know, or how and when are we to implement the kingdom of Yahweh? The when part of the prayer was already given. The commissioning of that part is when. Now is the time. Jesus, I believe, was reinstituting the kingdom mandate, which was begun in David. He was now beginning the restoration of the tabernacle of David that had fallen. How soon after Jesus gave His disciples the command to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done," should they have begun praying that prayer? Well, I would have to say the next time they fell on their knees to pray. That's what should be also included in our prayer. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And as soon as that night or the next morning when they began to pray, and I also give you that commission. When should it be prayed? The next time you get on your knees and begin to pray. Whenever Jesus gave His disciples a command, they were to begin immediately, unless Jesus specifically said, "It is not for now." Yeah, you can see that in a lot of times when the prophetic word was given. Paul wasn't allowed to go into a certain place now, but he was given later. John was not supposed to reveal something now. Daniel was not supposed to reveal something now because it was not time for it. Since that command has already been given, then we should be implementing Yahweh's plan. The question that arises is, who is to carry out the accomplishment of that prophetic word? My answer is the church / the Ekklesia. But what has happened is the Ekklesia or the church was asleep until about 500 years ago. And we had some sparks here and there, starting with Martin Luther, with the just shall live by faith, approximately 1500, followed by the Wesley brothers on how one should live a sanctified life. And then we had the Azusa Street outpouring, which told us how one should increase in their lives by gaining the ability to hear the Holy Spirit saying and then being baptized in the Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues. And then there was the healing movement and the evangelist movement, Yahweh using men, women as just as much as he was using men during those roaring 20s. And then the evangelist was big during that time also. Then the pastor took precedent when there was a great influx of people that were being saved come into the local church. And then we had the Word of Faith movement that brought in the teacher. And the pastor was probably the height of the teacher movement. And then we continue as we go from the bottom up. The prophet was reintroduced to the skeptics out there who thought that prophecy went out when the last apostle died. We can see that come heavily in the 1980s. The teaching movement with the Word of Faith movement heavily in the 70s, early 60s, mid 60s to the 70s. Now, each time one other gift or teaching or person in the body that came up, the other one wasn't done. It just included those extras coming in. And then we saw, continue from the bottom up, the apostles. And then the turn that came in at the turn of the century, the 2000, we had the introduction or the reintroduction of the apostle, who by way is more than just a missionary worker, as some people think. The apostle brings structure to the building. If you really want to know, the apostle was always in the midst, but it just wasn't needed until now. The apostle is like, if you've ever been on a construction site, it's like the superintendent on the construction site. You hardly ever see them until there is a need for clarification with what's in the blueprints. And if any changes are needed, he is the one that sees that they get done. The apostle is there when the foundation is laid, and so is the prophet and the teacher. Now what we have in the church is the church is ready to take her position and bring about what is needed in the reestablishment of the church / Ekklesia. There is a need for a lot of teaching now in order for the church to take their place in society or to actually be reintroduced to society. And with the church finding her spot, there is an opposition that keeps trying to keep her out. The church or the Ekklesia has been out of the fight for so long is that she seems to be a stranger in the mix. She was there all along, but without a voice, or should I say she didn't voice her opinions. She sounded like the silent person. She was the shy one who would always sit in the corner and technically mind her own business. And the business was only church business when there was something to be done. Never teaching those in the pews how to operate in the other mandates or in the other mountains as we have known. The church had her flying clothes on. In other words, she was ready to take off in the rapture, what they call escape mentality. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have some astounding news for you. The church is not going, ain't going anywhere anytime soon. We have a job to complete that was started at Pentecost and will continue until Yahweh sends Jesus to get his bride. The rapture of the church / Ekklesia will not be a time when the church is rescued from this world as we have been taught in the past. But I just want to tell you, the church, the world will want the church to leave so that they can live. Or otherwise, as we saw in Exodus, when the children of Israel was leaving Egypt, the leadership of the Pharaoh said, Pharaoh, you must let them go or we will all be dead men. The Ekklesia will be in communion with the Holy Trinity and will give birth to a new breed without greed or radical opposition to corruption. It will be, in other words, the salt of the earth, which is the antidote for corruption. It will also be the light in the world, showing victory over the darkness. How will this Ekklesia come about? Well, let me just say this. It's already been birthed into the earth. It was birthed in the midst of all corruption, darkness, and deception that had infiltrated the earth. The Ekklesia will not be deceived by the serpent as it has in the past, with its lies and deception and lawlessness. The scripture says that we should not be ignorant of the devil's devices, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices, says 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. We should already be aware of what Satan has done and be ready for any attack. Matter of fact, we should act before he acts. We should not react to anything. We should always act. I remember teaching that last session. This Ekklesia is bringing forth a new breed of true sons and daughters in full maturity who will rule and reign with grace and prevailing power over the nations and the systems of this world, the systems being the 7 mountains. This Ekklesia will be nourished and sustained by being connected straightly from the throne of Yahweh. The Ekklesia will dislodge the enemy from his place and position. The Ekklesia will be preserved in the days of tribulation. Understand this now, not talking about the great tribulation, but tribulation in general. Jesus said this in John 16:13. In the world, and we are here, you shall have tribulation. That's the tribulation we're talking about. But he says, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. This is the tribulation that will not affect the church or the Ekklesia, for they will overcome it. These are just a few things the Ekklesia will encounter and overcome and prosper. All of this is just the beginning of the restoration of the tabernacle of David, which is not only worship and praise, but also a church that is restoring the government of Yahweh, notice, on the earth as it is in heaven. Well, we're going to continue this session on the Ekklesia and the instrument Yahweh is using in the earth to establish his government. Now, I took some of this week's session from the book, The Church Unusual, The Catalyst for Global Transformation by Dr. Jonathan David. If you would like to get a copy of the book, you can write his ministry and request one at jonathandavid.org. And then you can request now. You can get it even quicker than normal through the mail. Just go ahead and ebook it, and you can get it as quickly as downloading it. Well, if you enjoyed this week, just hit the like button, probably right about there, and and it'll be spread to other people. And if you want to get next week's lesson session up when it comes up, just go ahead and hit subscribe, and you will be notified the next session. Well, if you still wish to give to this ministry, go ahead and scan the QR code right there, and it will send you to Venmo, or you can go straight to Venmo at Hosea INT and give that way. Well, I'm Dr. Ray, and I will see you next week on Hosea International Speaks.